The cafeteria buzzed with the restless energy of children set free from their classrooms. The air was thick with the mingling scents of pizza, reheated chicken nuggets, and peanut butter sandwiches, a blend both comforting and overwhelming. Voices overlapped, laughter spilled across the long tables, and the sound of plastic lunch trays clattered like drums in an untidy symphony. Timothy Wilson sat quietly in the middle of it all, a single island of silence amid the noise. His small hands rested on the bright blue lunchbox his father had bought for him, the kind with cartoon astronauts on the lid. The hinges creaked softly as he opened it, hopeful, even though deep inside he already knew what he would find. Nothing. Not a sandwich. Not an apple. Not even the crumb of a cookie. Just the hollow plastic interior that reflected his wide eyes back at him, mocking him with its emptiness. His stomach growled, loud and undeniable, betraying him to the world. He quickly shut the lid and hugged the lunchbox close, as if holding it tightly might somehow change the truth. Around him, his classmates tore open juice boxes and traded chips, unaware of the boy who had nothing. Timothy's throat tightened, his eyes stinging as tears threatened to spill. He dropped his head, not wanting anyone to see, but they always noticed. "Hey, rich boy." Billy Thompson's voice carried across the table, smug and sharp. "What's wrong? Daddy didn't send lobster and caviar today?" Laughter erupted from his friends, some slapping the table in amusement. Timothy flinched, cheeks burning. He wasn't surprised by the jeers anymore. It had become routine. His father's wealth was no secret, and his designer clothes stood out in a school where most families struggled to afford basics. What no one knew was how little those clothes mattered to him. What good was a shirt that cost more than a month's rent for some families, when he sat here with nothing to eat? At the far end of the table, Vanessa leaned back in her chair, her smirk as polished as the glossy bow clipped in her perfect hair. 10 years old, confident in the way only children who enjoy power can be, she raised an eyebrow and tilted her head. "Oops," she said, her voice honeyed with false innocence. "I guess I forgot to pack your lunch again, Timmy. Silly me. Forgotten. Again. The third time this week alone." And Timothy knew it wasn't a mistake. Vanessa's mother, Diane, had married his father 6 months ago, and from the moment Vanessa had entered his life, she had treated him like an intruder. She had a way of making him feel small even when she wasn't speaking, an eye roll here, a smirk there, the triumphant glimmer in her eyes when she knew he wouldn't dare speak up. Timothy swallowed hard. He wanted to tell her to stop. He wanted to push back, to demand that she give him the lunch she had probably hidden away somewhere. But the words shrank before they reached his lips. Instead, he lowered his head again, letting the cafeteria noise wash over him, drowning in a silence only he could hear. Should he tell his father? The thought flickered in his mind, sharp and dangerous. Edward Wilson was a man who could command boardrooms, who built an empire from the ground up. Timothy knew his father loved him. He'd enrolled him in this ordinary public school to teach him humility, to give him a normal life after his mother's death. But what if telling him about Vanessa made his father think he was weak? What if he thought Timothy couldn't handle life outside the mansion walls? The fear of disappointing him weighed heavier than the ache of his empty stomach. So Timothy said nothing. He sat there quiet and trembling, a boy with everything and nothing at all, clutching an empty lunchbox as if it could protect him from the cruel world closing in. And across the table, Vanessa smiled. The bell signaling lunch had barely finished ringing when Timothy's world seemed to fold inward. The echo of Vanessa's cruel smirk lingered in his ears, louder than the clatter of trays or the laughter bouncing off the tiled cafeteria walls. His stomach, hollow and restless, twisted again, reminding him that hunger was not patient. It clawed at him, gnawed at him, a constant reminder of his powerlessness. He pushed the lunchbox further down the table, hoping to make it invisible. Hoping to make himself invisible. He wished he could disappear into the crowd, vanish into the walls, dissolve into the noise like a puff of smoke. Anything was better than sitting there exposed, like prey surrounded by circling predators. That was when he heard it. Soft footsteps, careful and hesitant, stopping just by his side. "Why don't you sit with us, Timothy?" The voice was small but clear, carrying an unexpected warmth. He blinked, startled, and looked up into a pair of wide brown eyes framed by a face smudged with the faint traces of dust and weariness. Lily Carson stood there, her dress faded to a dull shade from too many washes, Her shoes scuffed until the leather peeled at the toes. She didn't look at him with mockery or judgment. She looked at him as if she saw through the walls he'd built around himself. Timothy stammered, cheeks flushing. I don't have any food. His voice cracked, barely louder than a whisper. Lily tilted her head, her lips curving into the smallest smile, the kind of smile that didn't pity. It welcomed. That's okay. I can share. Before he could protest, she reached out and took his hand. Her touch was light, but it anchored him, pulling him from the storm of humiliation that had been raging in his chest. He followed her across the cafeteria, past rows of noisy tables where children traded cookies and boasted about video game scores. They stopped at a corner table, quiet and nearly empty. A safe corner. Lily sat down and placed her lunchbox on the table. Unlike his gleaming astronaut-themed one, hers was battered, the paint chipped, the hinges loose. She opened it with care as though unveiling something precious. Inside lay half a peanut butter sandwich, cut unevenly, and a small bottle of water. That was all. No fruit, no chips, no dessert wrapped in shiny foil. Timothy stared stunned. This is all you have? She nodded without hesitation. It's not much, she said, her voice steady. But my mom made it with love. And now, she broke the sandwich in half and held out the larger piece. Now it's made with friendship too. His throat tightened, his eyes prickling with unexpected tears. All around him children feasted without sparing him a glance, while this girl who clearly had almost nothing, was offering him half of her world. He took the sandwich with trembling hands. It was soft, slightly uneven, the crust a little too dry. But when he bit into it, it was the best thing he had tasted in years. Because it wasn't food alone, it was kindness. Yet before he could even whisper a thank you, a shadow fell across the table. Well, isn't this cute? Vanessa's voice sliced through the fragile moment like a blade. She stood over them, arms crossed, her eyes glittering with cruel delight. Her glossy shoes tapped impatiently against the linoleum, sharp little clicks that sounded louder than the entire cafeteria. Trying to make friends with money, little beggar? She sneered, her gaze fixed on Lily. What are you after? His allowance? A golden ticket out of your dump of a house? Timothy's stomach clenched harder than before, but not from hunger this time. From anger. He looked up at his stepsister, her smirk daring him to stay silent, daring him to cower the way he always did. But Lily looked just as confused as she did hurt. Her brows furrowed, her lips parting in genuine bewilderment. Why did she call you rich? She asked, her voice soft but steady, turning to him as though Vanessa's cruelty was less important than his answer. Timothy froze. His heart thudded in his chest, his pulse racing with fear. He had never told anyone at school about his father, not even teachers. To them he was just Timothy, the quiet boy with expensive shoes and sad eyes. Now standing between Lily's unshakable kindness and Vanessa's venom, he felt cornered. Should he tell her the truth? Should he admit that the boy clutching half a sandwich from her shabby lunchbox was the heir to billions, the son of one of the most powerful men in America? Or should he keep the secret even if it meant betraying her trust? The cafeteria noise faded to a dull hum around him. His answer could change everything, and Lily was still waiting. Timothy's lips parted, but no words came out. The cafeteria around him buzzed as if nothing unusual was happening, yet inside his chest a storm raged. Lily's eyes, wide, curious but not cruel, waited for an answer. She wasn't mocking him. She wasn't like Vanessa. But the question hung in the air, sharp as glass. Why did she call you rich? He looked down at the sandwich still in his hand, half gone now. The peanut butter stuck to the roof of his mouth, thick and dry. But it was the lump in his throat that kept him from speaking. If he told her the truth, that his father was Edward Wilson, a man whose face appeared on Forbes magazine covers, a billionaire who could buy the entire block Lily lived on without blinking, would she see him differently? Would she stop sharing her tiny lunches and start expecting things he couldn't give? My dad. Timothy forced his voice steady, though it trembled beneath the weight of the lie. Has a good job. That's all. It wasn't entirely untrue. Edward Wilson did have a job, a good one if controlling an empire worth billions counted. But Timothy felt the guilt settle in his stomach, heavier than the hunger had been minutes ago. Lily nodded slowly, studying him with a seriousness far beyond her years. She didn't press further. Instead, She folded what remained of her sandwich carefully back into the wax paper, as though even crumbs had value. "That's nice," she said quietly. "My mom, she has 3 jobs." Timothy's eyes lifted in surprise. "She cleans houses in the mornings," Lily continued, her voice steady but soft. "Works at the supermarket during the day, and then waitresses at night. She says she barely sleeps, but it's the only way to keep our roof and—" She glanced down, her fingers picking at the chipped corner of her lunchbox. "And food on the table." There was no shame in her words, only a blunt honesty that made Timothy's chest ache. He imagined her mother dragging herself from one job to the next, hands raw from scrubbing, feet sore from standing, eyes heavy with exhaustion. And here was Lily, smiling, offering him half her only sandwich. "What about your dad?" The question slipped out before Timothy could stop it. Something flickered in Lily's eyes. Pain, sharp, undeniable, before she masked it with a shrug. "He left when I was 4. Mom says he couldn't handle responsibility. Some people just run." Silence stretched between them. Not awkward, not empty, but heavy with unspoken truths. Timothy stared at the table, his fingers tracing the grooves in the wood. And then quietly, almost as if confessing a secret, he said, "My mom died 2 years ago, cancer." The mask Lily wore cracked, her eyes softening. She didn't say she was sorry. She didn't murmur empty words. Instead, she reached across the table and placed her small hand on his. Warmth radiated through her touch, a warmth Timothy hadn't felt in so long. "Then we both know," she whispered, "what it's like to miss someone." Something inside Timothy broke open. For months he had carried his grief like a stone in his chest, heavy and unmovable. No one at school had known. His father buried himself in work, and Diane was too busy managing appearances to notice his pain. Vanessa, of course, delighted in it. But Lily saw him. Not the rich boy. Not the billionaire's son. Just Timothy. For the rest of lunch, their conversation drifted to lighter things. Timothy learned Lily's favorite color was yellow, because it feels like sunshine, and that she loved to draw but never had enough paper. She laughed when he admitted his favorite subject was math, saying numbers gave her headaches, but she loved art because even mistakes can turn into something beautiful. They both confessed their love for dogs, and for the first time in a long time, Timothy found himself laughing. Not the polite chuckle he gave adults, but a real laugh that shook free some of the darkness he'd been carrying, yet beneath the laughter his secret gnawed at him. Each time Lily's eyes sparkled, each time her smile grew brighter, he felt the weight of what he hadn't told her pressing harder. He wanted to tell her everything. He wanted to trust her. But the fear of losing this fragile new bond was stronger than his hunger had ever been. The lunch bell rang, startling them both. Children scrambled to clean up, trays clattering and chairs scraping against the floor. Timothy stood slowly, still clutching the lunchbox that had begun this whole moment. "I'll see you tomorrow?" Lily asked, her tone uncertain, as if she wasn't sure a boy like him would really want to sit with her again. Timothy nodded quickly, his voice firmer than he felt. "Yeah, tomorrow." As they parted ways, Vanessa's shadow slipped into step beside him, her voice a sharp whisper meant for his ears alone. "You can play poor with her all you want," she sneered, her lips curling into a smile that made his stomach turn. "But secrets never stay buried. Sooner or later, she's going to find out who you really are." Timothy's heart thudded in his chest, because he knew Vanessa was right. And when that day came, would Lily still be his friend? The next day, Timothy entered the cafeteria with a strange, nervous anticipation buzzing in his chest. He hadn't realized how much he had looked forward to this moment, seeing Lily again sitting at her quiet corner table and sharing conversation that didn't feel like a trap. For the first time in months, the walk through the crowded hallway didn't feel so heavy. Lily was already there, her shabby lunchbox on the table in front of her. She waved when she saw him, and something in Timothy's chest eased. He smiled back, a real smile this time, and slid into the seat across from her. Today she had a small container of rice and beans, and again, she split it evenly without hesitation. Timothy tried to protest, insisting she should eat more, but she shook her head with quiet determination. "Food tastes better when it's shared," she said again, as though it were a rule written in the sky. For a moment, the world shrank to just the two of them. They laughed about a teacher's squeaky shoes, whispered about a kid who had accidentally dumped milk all over his tray, and compared what kind of dogs they'd want someday. Her dream was a golden retriever. His was a husky. But the peace didn't last. Across the room, Vanessa watched. She sat flanked by her little entourage, her chin high, eyes sharp. Her smirk was thin and deliberate, like a blade pressed against skin. She leaned in close to Billy Thompson, whispering something that made him burst out laughing. Moments later, whispers began to spread like wildfire. Heads turned, glances flicked toward Timothy and Lily, and snickers echoed across the cafeteria. "See that girl?" A boy muttered loudly enough for Timothy to hear. "She's just hanging out with him because he's rich." "Of course," another chimed in. "Who'd want to sit with her otherwise?" The laughter stung like needles against Timothy's skin. He looked at Lily. She sat stiffly, her shoulders tense, her smile faltering. Her cheeks flushed a deep red, but she didn't look down. She kept her gaze steady, as if refusing to let the whispers break her. Vanessa chose that moment to stand. She glided across the cafeteria like it was a stage, and she was the star, her designer shoes tapping against the floor with authority. She stopped at their table, her shadow looming over both of them. Well, she said sweetly, her voice dripping with venom. "Looks like my little stepbrother found himself a charity case." Timothy's jaw clenched. His fingers curled into fists under the table. He wanted to shout at her, to tell her to leave Lily alone, but before he could speak, Vanessa leaned closer to Lily, her smile widening. "Everyone knows why you're sitting with him. Don't think anyone believes this little act. You're just after his money. Isn't that right, Timmy?" Lily's eyes widened. She turned to Timothy, searching his face, looking for the truth. His chest tightened. He wanted to say something, anything that would erase the doubt creeping into her expression. "She's wrong," Timothy said firmly, louder than he expected. His voice trembled, but he didn't stop. "Lily's my friend." "She's not like that." The cafeteria fell quiet. Dozens of eyes were on him. The shy, timid boy who never spoke up had just challenged Vanessa in front of everyone. Vanessa's expression faltered for the briefest moment, surprise flickering across her face before she quickly masked it with a cruel laugh. "Friend, please. You think Daddy's going to be happy when he finds out his precious son is hanging around with trash?" The words sliced through Timothy like a knife. But what hurt more was the way Lily's face twisted. Confusion, hurt, and something else he couldn't name. Vanessa's laughter echoed as she turned and strutted back to her table. Her mission accomplished. Timothy wanted to reach across the table, to grab Lily's hand the way she had grabbed his yesterday, but his courage faltered under the weight of so many eyes. Lily sat silently, her food untouched, her smile gone. For the rest of lunch, they barely spoke. The whispers continued around them, buzzing like flies, feeding off Vanessa's poison. And Timothy knew, with a sinking feeling, that this wasn't just about lunch anymore. Vanessa wasn't going to stop. She had declared war on their friendship, and Timothy didn't know if he was strong enough to protect it. That night, Timothy lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the shadows of his room stretching long and cold. He clutched his pillow to his chest as though it could shield him from the memory of the cafeteria whispers. The sound of Vanessa's laughter echoed in his head, sharp as broken glass, replaying over and over until he wanted to scream. Lily's face haunted him even more. The confusion in her eyes, the way her shoulders had stiffened under the weight of other kids' stares. She had stood by him in silence, but her silence was not strength, it was hurt. He felt it in his bones, and he hated himself for not saying more, for not shielding her from Vanessa's cruelty the way she had shielded him from hunger. He had promised himself he would tell her the truth one day. Not now, not yet, but soon. He just needed her to believe in their friendship long enough for him to prove he wasn't like the world Vanessa painted him to be. The next afternoon, after school let out, Lily surprised him by walking beside him as he headed toward the bike racks. Her worn backpack hung heavy on her small shoulders and her shoes scuffed against the pavement. She didn't look at him at first, but her presence alone made his heart race. "You okay?" Timothy asked, his voice cautious. Lily shrugged, eyes still forward. "People talk. They always talk. I'm used to it." The words hit him like a stone. She shouldn't have to be used to it. Not the laughter, not the whispers, not the pity disguised as cruelty. She deserved more than survival. "Do you want to come over tomorrow?" Timothy blurted before he could think. That made her glance at him, eyebrows raised in surprise. "My house?" he clarified, heat rushing to his cheeks. "You could, I don't know, we could do homework together, or just hang out. Away from everyone." A pause. Then slowly Lily smiled. Okay. The next day Timothy's chest swelled with both dread and anticipation. He had told his father he was bringing a friend home, and Edward had barely looked up from his laptop muttering something about, good. Normal childhood. Proud of you, son. Diane hadn't even noticed. That at least worked in Timothy's favor. When Lily arrived, he met her at the gate and hurried her through the garden before she could look too closely at the carefully trimmed hedges or the imported stone fountain. He steered her not toward the grand front doors, but toward a side entrance leading to a smaller, less ostentatious part of the house. Inside, he'd tried to make his room look ordinary, hiding the expensive watch his father had gifted him in a drawer, tossing a designer jacket into the closet, covering the polished hardwood floor with a plain rug. Still, it was impossible to erase all the signs. The books on his shelf were leather-bound editions, not paperbacks. The piano in the corner gleamed with polish. Even the air smelled faintly of lavender from the cleaning staff's work that morning. Lily noticed. She didn't say it aloud, but Timothy saw her eyes flicker over the details, her brow creasing slightly. She ran her fingers over the smooth wood of the piano keys. You play? Timothy hesitated. Sometimes. My mom taught me. Before. The heaviness in his voice stopped her from pressing further. She sat on the edge of his bed, her legs swinging, looking small against the expanse of the room. It's nice here, she said softly, though her tone carried something unspoken. Curiosity, maybe even suspicion. Timothy forced a smile. It's just home, but inside panic churned. He could see the cracks forming in the mask he wore. The truth was seeping through, and Lily was perceptive. Too perceptive. If she asked the right questions, if she pushed just a little harder, the secret he had guarded so fiercely would collapse. Still, she didn't. Instead, she pulled a crumpled notebook from her bag and began sketching, the pencil scratching softly against the page. Timothy watched as lines became shapes. Shapes became a dog with floppy ears and a wagging tail. She smiled faintly at her work. I draw when I feel like the world's too loud, she admitted. Makes it quieter. Like I can breathe again. He nodded, understanding in ways he couldn't say. For him, it was the piano. For her, a pencil. Two children searching for air in lives that suffocated them. But just as peace began to settle between them, footsteps echoed in the hallway. Light, quick, purposeful. The door creaked. And there stood Vanessa, her arms folded, her eyes glittering like a predator who had just discovered prey. Well, isn't this interesting? She purred, her gaze darting from Timothy to Lily to the polished piano behind them. Her smirk widened. So this is where you've been hiding, Timmy, playing house with your little friend. Timothy's stomach sank. He knew that look, that smile. Vanessa wasn't just curious, she had found ammunition, and she would use it. As Vanessa leaned against the doorway, a cruel gleam in her eyes, Timothy realized with a chill that the cracks in his secret were about to shatter wide open. The morning began like any other, but Timothy felt the weight of something looming. The sun was too bright, the chatter in the hallways too sharp, the footsteps of classmates too loud. Lily walked beside him, her smile faint but steady, as though she was pretending nothing had changed since yesterday. Yet Timothy could see it in her eyes. Questions she hadn't voiced, doubts she hadn't dared to ask. And somewhere behind them, like a shadow they couldn't shake, Vanessa trailed. She had been quieter than usual that morning. Too quiet, no mocking remark over breakfast. No sly grin as she passed him in the hallway. That silence unsettled Timothy more than her cruelty. Vanessa was planning something. He could feel it. By the time lunch rolled around, his hands were slick with sweat. He and Lily sat together in their usual corner, but the cafeteria felt different, charged as if the air itself was waiting for a storm. Children kept glancing their way, whispering, pointing. Timothy's stomach twisted with dread. And then the storm broke. Vanessa stepped onto one of the cafeteria benches, the clatter drawing every pair of eyes in the room. She stood tall, her voice carrying easily over the noise. Hey everyone, she called, her tone sing-song sweet. Want to hear a secret about my dear little stepbrother? Timothy's blood ran cold. Billy Thompson hooted from across the room. Spill it, Vanessa. Others leaned in, hungry for drama. The cafeteria had become an arena, and Vanessa stood in the center, feeding the crowd. She turned slowly, savoring the moment, before her gaze locked on Lily. You think he's just some lonely boy, don't you? Her voice dripped venom, each word sharp and deliberate. You share your pathetic sandwiches with him like he needs your pity. But let me tell you who you've really been sitting with. Timothy's heart pounded. His throat closed. He wanted to shout to stop her, but fear chained him in place. Vanessa pulled a folded magazine from her backpack and held it high for all to see. On its glossy cover, Edward Wilson's face stared back, confident, polished. The words Billionaire Visionary, the man behind Wilson Enterprises, printed in bold letters beneath. Gasps rippled across the cafeteria. Vanessa grinned, triumphant. That's his dad. Edward Wilson, one of the richest men in America. My stepbrother isn't some poor little boy. He's a billionaire's son. And you, she jabbed a finger toward Lily, are nothing more than charity to him. A project. A joke. The room erupted. Voices overlapped. No way. Seriously? That's him? The noise crashing like waves against Timothy's skull. Lily froze, her eyes wide, her breath caught in her chest. She turned to Timothy, searching his face, desperate for denial, for explanation. But he couldn't move. He couldn't speak. His secret, the one he had guarded so fiercely, now lay bare in the cruelest possible light. You lied, Lily whispered. Her voice was soft, but the crack in it shattered Timothy's heart. No, I didn't. He reached for her hand, but she pulled back as though his touch might burn. Vanessa laughed, the sound sharp and merciless. Didn't you, Timmy? You let her think you were just like her. You let her waste her crumbs on you, when you could have bought the whole cafeteria 10 times over. The laughter from nearby tables joined hers, some cruel, some nervous, all feeding Timothy's shame. His chest burned, tears pricked at his eyes, but he blinked them back, refusing to cry in front of them all. Lily, please, he begged, his voice breaking. I didn't want you to treat me differently. I just wanted a friend. But Lily shook her head, her hands trembling as she clutched her lunchbox to her chest like a shield. You should have trusted me, she said, her words heavy with hurt. You didn't, and now, I don't know what's real. She stood, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. The cafeteria quieted, watching. For a moment, Timothy hoped she might stay. But then she turned and walked away, her small frame swallowed by the sea of staring faces. The silence that followed was suffocating. Vanessa hopped down from the bench, her smirk radiant with victory. She leaned close as she passed him, her whisper colder than winter. Secrets never stay hidden. Timmy, and now you've lost the only person dumb enough to believe in you. Timothy sat frozen, the magazine cover gleaming under the harsh cafeteria lights. Around him the laughter rose again, cruel and relentless. But louder than all of it was the echo of Lily's voice, breaking under betrayal. You should have trusted me. And for the first time, Timothy wondered if maybe he had lost her forever. For days, Timothy walked the halls like a ghost. His classmates no longer laughed in whispers. They openly gawked, their eyes lingering not with kindness but with curiosity, envy, and scorn. The secret was out. His life, which had once been invisible, now burned under a magnifying glass. But the worst part wasn't the stares. It was the absence of Lily. She no longer waited for him in the mornings. She no longer saved him a seat at lunch. When he looked for her, she was always surrounded by other kids, quiet, guarded, her lunchbox clutched tight as though it might shield her from betrayal. Timothy longed to explain, to beg, to show her that what they had was real. But each time he opened his mouth, the words died before they left. And all the while, Vanessa's smile grew sharper. One evening, as the family gathered for dinner, the weight of it all became too much. The long dining table stretched like an ocean between him and his father, who scrolled through his phone, nodding absently at Diane's chatter. Vanessa sat beside her mother, twirling spaghetti around her fork with smug satisfaction. Timothy's chest heaved. He couldn't eat. He couldn't breathe. At last he pushed his plate away, the scrape of porcelain loud in the silence. Dad, he said, his voice trembling. Edward looked up, startled. It was rare for Timothy to speak during these dinners. Yes, son? Timothy swallowed hard. His heart pounded like a drum. Do you know what she's been doing to me? He cast a shaking hand toward Vanessa. She's been taking my lunches, making fun of me, telling everyone, his voice cracked, telling everyone things I wasn't ready for them to know. The room froze. Diane's fork clattered against her plate. Vanessa stiffened, her smugness faltering. Edward's brow furrowed. He set his phone down slowly. Is this true? His voice was quiet, but it carried the kind of weight that silenced boardrooms and bent empires to his will. Vanessa sputtered. He's lying. He's trying to make me look bad. Enough, Edward said, his tone cutting through her protest like a blade. His gaze shifted back to Timothy, softening. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Tears welled in Timothy's eyes. Because I didn't want you to think I was weak. You said you wanted me to learn about the real world. I thought if I told you, you'd be disappointed in me again. Edward's face broke, the mask of the powerful CEO slipping to reveal something rawer, more human. He pushed back his chair and knelt beside his son, taking Timothy's small hands in his own. Son, he whispered, his voice thick. Teaching you about life was never supposed to mean leaving you unprotected. You are not weak. You are the strongest boy I know. For surviving things no child should have to. And I am sorry. I failed you. For the first time in years, Timothy let himself cry into his father's chest, and Edward held him, firm and steady, as though anchoring him against the storm. But Edward Wilson was not just a father. He was a man who commanded respect. The next day he appeared at the school. The staff hurried to accommodate him, wide-eyed at the billionaire in their halls, but he waved them off. His eyes searched until they landed on two children, Vanessa, frozen in place, and Lily, sitting alone at the far edge of the playground. He called them both forward. Timothy tells me you've been mistreated, Edward said to Lily, his voice carrying authority yet threaded with gentleness. By my stepdaughter and by the cruelty of others. Is that true? Lily hesitated, her fingers tightening on the straps of her backpack. I don't want to cause trouble, she whispered. Edward shook his head. Telling the truth is not trouble. It is courage. Her eyes flicked to Timothy, then back to Edward. Slowly she nodded. Edward turned then, his expression like steel, to Vanessa. You humiliated my son. You tore down a girl who showed more generosity with half a sandwich than you have ever shown with all the riches at your feet. His voice grew sharper. That ends now. Vanessa flushed scarlet, opening her mouth to protest, but Edward silenced her with a single raised hand. There will be consequences for every action. And you will learn that cruelty is not power, it is poison. Then he looked at Lily again, his expression softening. You fed my boy when no one else would. You gave him kindness when he had nothing. For that I owe you more than I can ever repay. But please understand. He glanced at Timothy, then back. He hid his truth not because he didn't trust you, but because he was afraid to lose you. Lily's eyes shimmered. She studied Timothy for a long moment, the hurt still present but now joined by understanding. Is that true? She asked quietly. Timothy stepped closer, his voice breaking but steady. Yes, I was scared. Not of you, but of the way everyone else sees me. I didn't want you to see the billionaire's son. I wanted you to see me. Just me. The silence stretched. And then slowly Lily smiled. It was small, cautious, but real. I don't care if you're rich or poor, Timothy. I just care if you're honest. Friends don't need secrets. Relief flooded his chest, warm and overwhelming. For the first time, Timothy truly believed her. Edward straightened, resting a hand on both children's shoulders. Then it seems my son has found a friend worth more than all the wealth in the world. The playground hummed with whispers, but Timothy no longer heard them. For once, the stares didn't matter. Beside him stood Lily, steady and kind. Behind him stood his father, proud and unshakable. And in that moment, Timothy Wilson, billionaire's son, orphaned boy, empty lunchbox child, felt richer than ever before.